It was kind of funny because when I would tell people I was in video games, the biggest thing they would say to me is like, especially women, they'd be like, I'm so sorry, I don't play games. And I would always tell them like, it's not you, it's because there hasn't been a game made for you.
And there was a perception, wasn't there, of sort of, you know, it being very violent or very overly sexualized? Because obviously there were some games that were like that, right?
I mean, most of the games are built by men. So it's like, if it's mostly men and not a lot of them are Christian, they may not care as much, right? So it's not all of them that are that way, but I think probably as mom of boys, you care a lot about, is there too much violence? Is there too much sexual? Like, it is content and you have to be aware of it, just like you're watching movies, for sure. And so, that's a call for like more Christian creators to go and build games, build movies, build all these things. And to the field, because I just think it's totally right. There's so much influence that can happen. We probably need a whole nother hour for like why Christians are not in this space. But like, the call it's like, in my mind, I feel like at the heart of the game is play. And that's just
it's where people are. I mean, that's what it's
where people are. It's play. And to me, like, play is part of God's character. It's our Imago Dei. And I'm always like, well, you know, the first game you played, any human played, it was not a gendered game. It was called Peekaboo, and you were learning object permanence. So that's why I'm like, no, gaming should be for everyone.
Well, hello and welcome to the lead podcast for Advocate Collective. We're an organisation that supports public advocacy for the Christian faith and provides support for professional therapy to survivors of abuse. We also empower women in their workplaces towards the Great Commission. And on the lead podcast today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome an extraordinary woman that I met earlier this year, and I was so inspired to hear some of her story and meet her. Her name is Holly Liu. Holly is an American businesswoman and venture capitalist. She's the co-founder of the mobile gaming company Kabam. She is currently focused on creating a curated community at the intersection of entertainment and tech. Welcome to the podcast, Holly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's awesome to meet you. And I'll tell the listeners in a moment what sort of blew me away about meeting you, connected to my kids. But let's just start a little bit with your journey personally. Can you tell us where you were born, where you grew up, and how you made your way to Silicon Valley?
So I'm the daughter of two loving Chinese immigrant parents, and they came to the US from China via Taiwan. And this was quite popular during a certain time frame, because that was probably the only time that Chinese people of Chinese descent were allowed through, and they came through an education route. And so you see that a lot in what we call Asian American culture here. And I will say it was a very particular time. You'll kind of see this woven in, but there were a lot of us who were part of this community. We didn't all quite know each other, but many of us actually started companies that many people know today, like Rotten Tomatoes. His parents were very similar journey. The Guitar Hero founders, YouTube founder. So there was something very kind of very interesting about that time. And for us as children of these parents. So they came over in probably the 60s, and they were here on a student visa. That was probably, again, the only way. So academics was a very important role for many of us. I was born in a small town in Southern California called Palmdale, and we call it a blue collar town. So very working class. My parents were teachers, a primary and secondary teaching, so elementary and high school, and in public, public universities. And then I went to school in Los Angeles, and when I was there, so this was probably during the 90s. There was just I had a very big interest in international travel. I actually originally had thought about going into the foreign service
Wow.
with the U.S. government at one
Yeah.
point, and I did a couple of internships, did some traveling, and I realized that the path probably wasn't for me. And at the same time, what was happening is really the birth of the internet. And don't get me wrong, the internet, was born in the 70s, but this was like access to everybody. I
Yeah,
remember when
exactly.
I was in high school, a senior high school, one of my friends actually from youth group came back and he goes, Holly, have you heard of email? And I'm like, email, what's that? So it was a very different generation. I got my first email address, but well, I'm dating
What was
myself.
your
It
first?
really
Oh,
didn't
probably
exist.
don't tell the
Oh,
listeners,
it's
but
very embarrassing because it was like, it's me 23. Like we didn't even know what we were doing. We didn't know how
no,
to have
exactly.
handles or anything of that sort. So it was pretty
Amazing.
funny. And that was through the university. And we had to go through these terminals, command line terminals. So the browser
Yeah,
hadn't even really existed either. That's not how we got onto the internet. So by the time I started, by the time I left university, though, there was this thing called a browser. There
yeah,
was HTML. There was now a window. They even called it Microsoft Windows, the OS. And so at the time, I think like I was always quite interested in technology. It was juxtaposed against doing some work with government. Government is different and it's a very different pace. And I just loved the satisfaction of being able to put something out there and then get feedback right away,
yeah,
especially on
yeah.
UX design and interface design. Uh, at the time I actually left, it's kind of funny. I took a little bit of a detour. I ended up in accounting at one of
Right.
the big fives for a while, for like about a year and a half. And I was like, oh, this is not for me.
But you probably got some good training there, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're really, I think the big firms, one of the nice things about it is they train you for work habits really
Yes.
well. Because, all through university, I just remember thinking this all through university, I would have phone calls with friends and everything, but there was never an obligation to return it. But now there was like this urgency, like you have to return these calls. I thought, oh, okay. I just remember thinking that. I was like, oh, I think I need to like pick up the pace.
Did your parents have a sort of particular career path for you in mind as well? Were they kind of, you
Oh,
must have
yeah.
been an
It was
accountant or,
usually, oh, yeah. It
yeah,
was like doctor, lawyer, or accountant back
yeah,
in the day. Engineering was like a new one. So now I
yeah,
think engineering is an acceptable path. And so when I did the accounting side, and reality is I went in because I was very interested in tech implementations. But
mm,
during the time I actually started my career, they actually pushed back the start date because the internet bubble happened here in the US.
yeah, of
So
course,
I
yeah,
I pretty much had a re-interview for a job that I didn't really have, and I was like, oh my gosh, I may not have a job, but I had a job. It was in a very different field. It was actually in what they call internal audit. Sometimes I would do some external audits and external accounting, but I realized this
mm,
was not was not my particular gifting. I was always amazed with other people. So I knew I went straight away. I was like, oh my gosh, probably about 9 months in, I was like, oh, I don't think I could stay here. I think
mm,
I had to go. I was like, the only thing I know very well is how to fill out those little Scantron bubbles and take those blue book exams. So I was like, I could go back to school. I know this. I could figure it
yeah,
out. And so I found a program up in the Bay Area that was called Information Management Systems. And over there, I learned about this discipline called human computing interface. And I just fell in love with that. So I took
wow.
classes there.
You'd left your job to do that. Did that feel like
Oh,
quite a risk?
yeah. No. I think it was just so clear in my head that I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
this is
this is
just
not
not
it.
for me.
No.
I was very grateful because I might have only applied to one program and I got
Wow.
in.
Yeah,
So no, I take that back. I applied to maybe a couple more, but this was the one
you
that I was
wanted.
like, oh, I really wanted to come to the Bay Area.
At this point in your life, and you mentioned that you were in a church youth group as a teenager, what sort of role was faith playing in your story? Where was God in all of these decisions?
Yeah. So when I left high school, I ended up, I remember actually this, I did a visit of, I ended up at a university called UCLA, and I did a visit, and one of my friends from the cross country team, she was like, "Oh, you should visit my cousin." And she knew I was a Christian. And so, and her cousin was a Christian. And, um, they were part of this group called InterVarsity. And I was just
Mm.
really blown away by, like, they kept the door unlocked to their dorm room all the time. And I was like, why would you do that? And she goes, "Oh, like, we're trying to live in community like Acts 2. So people can come in and borrow our car anytime." There was
Wow.
like a sign up sheet, and I was blown away. I was like, this is what I want. Like, this is the experience I want of Jesus. So, yeah, I skipped through the, in terms of like with college, but, with InterVarsity, I was involved in Bible study. I learned about the inductive Bible study method where you allow like the words speaking to you. And I just fell in love with that. I fell in love with that,
Amazing.
with incarnational ministry, like the whole
Mm.
idea that Paul saying like to the Roman, I was a Roman, like there was just something about that that probably made me feel really seen. Because I
Mm.
grew up not around a lot of Asians, not around a lot of people that look like me. And that was like it was a big deal for me in terms of identity formation. And I think to have a God that's like incarnational, that would go and become who you are instead of
Mm.
asking me to change, because my whole life, it's like me changing. I have to change. But the whole idea that here is a God that, is changing to be like me, to have a better relationship with me. I
Wow.
think that's something that has always like kind of spoke to me. And I think that that's, and we'll probably get to this later, but that's been like an interesting thread of like, maybe the path that I have is a bit unique, and now I'm talking about this. I was like, that's true. This is like, talking and reflecting at the same time. I was like, yeah, I think there's something about that. I've never been a big fan of, too much what they call holy huddling,
Yes.
because even at youth group, like nobody looked like me. Every time I walked into the house, my practices were very different. Sometimes,
Mm.
you felt like, oh, is this, not godly, the way we're eating, or all of these things. But here is a God, when I went to college, like, here's a God who's like, no, it's not that there's nothing wrong with you, but there is nothing wrong with my creation, and I've created you differently, and I'm just in a different spot. Like, I
Yeah.
just grew up in a society that, in a time where nobody looked like me, nobody acted like me. It was just very different.
Yeah.
Um,
And culture is a beautiful thing to God, affirmed,
yes,
even in once we go and be with the Lord, the sense of the diversity of nations and I guess our different
exactly.
cultural identities as well.
Yes,
Really.
yeah. So it is something, I think that's what I love about the gospel, and I
Mm.
love about Jesus. It was kind of funny. I remember growing up as a kid, as I mentioned, I was pretty much the only Asian Chinese person. My last name is Liu, Liu. And, I remember coming home, I go, "Dad, I really hate my last name. I'm the only person with this." And he looked at me, he just started laughing. He's like, "Holly, you don't understand how common your last name is if you were to go to China." He's like the whole empire got their last name renamed to Liu. He's like, "You won't be able to tell the difference." He's all, "It's
Oh
as
my
common as
word.
Smith." Because that's what I really wanted. I really wanted the last name Cooper or Smith, like something very Americana.
Oh, how funny.
But it was pretty funny, and it's very true. Everybody's last name
Yeah.
is Liu. So just kind of rewinding that, I think for me, with God and, kind of the career, I think God, for me, I guess I just didn't feel like it was a risk because it was something I knew very well, like going back to
Yeah.
school. I think maybe the riskier thing, would have been something a little bit unknown. There is a bit of unknown, I'd say, going, but the Bay Area, which is just about an hour flight. My sister was up there.
Mhm.
I was dating somebody up there. So to me, I'm like, oh, this is great. If all of these things can fall
I'm
in
here
line.
for
So
it.
it's a little bit the opposite, direction. So,
So you got there for the course, and then and then how long was the course?
yeah, so the program for was about 2 years long.
Mhm.
I definitely learned a lot. I think it was a little bit of a harder time for me to adjust more than I expected.
Yeah.
it wasn't as rosy as I had kind of anticipated, but I still fell in love with technology. I think that was just always kind of there. And again, it's not the sense of, if you ask me, it's not like I was programming computers. So most of the people, they think of like, oh, she fell in love with technology. She must have been ripping apart computers and loved STEM and all of that. Not
Yeah.
really, right? Like, just so everybody knows, like in technology, especially the Bay Area, there's so many different roles and you can still be quote unquote working in tech.
Yeah.
I think some people think like, oh, I have to be a computer
This
engineer to work
absolute.
in
Yeah.
tech.
Yeah.
But there's actually a variety of roles. There's people who do finance, accounting for technology, and how technology companies amortize revenue,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
like, we're not amortize revenue, recognize revenue. But like, yes, so there's actually a lot of diversity inside of what we call tech jobs. Now, I wouldn't say I took one or two programming classes. I did do a little programming, but that wasn't my main job. So I found the career path of human computing interaction. It actually translates to what we call product design.
Yeah.
And basically, the profession is like, if you're designing your email inbox for a user, or the email inbox for the user, if they click on a button, what does it do? What does it show on the screen? So oftentimes it's referred to interaction design. But again, when I graduated, there just wasn't a lot of jobs in that field. So I went back to consulting. I just kept going back to the things that I ended up doing. And it was a tough time. I mean, I would probably call that time a bit of just waiting on the Lord, of like, I really like this field. What am I going to do? And there was just some economic downturn. So I just had to go back and find a job. And I'm grateful that I was able to do a job. And even more grateful to be able to do a job that, was a bit closer. But when kind of, I guess, the clouds lifted, I was like, okay, I remember waking up early in the morning, like 2 or 3 hours early in the morning, just to like submit my resume to these places. And I found a job in product design at AOL.
Wow.
And I worked at the time it was great. I was able to design interfaces for the media player, their safety and security, the antivirus stuff, some of their community things. So it was great. I spent about 3 years there, but during my time there, in the Bay Area, there was a resurgence of people doing startups. And at the time, I always had one foot kind of in the door, because oftentimes at that time, a lot of people would be quote unquote doing things on the side. There were other things in the ecosystem that wasn't mature. For example, funding. Funding was not very mature. So it was very hard for people to fundraise money, especially if they didn't have any, they were like us. It's not like we had built a large company before. And it's not like we had a lot of relationships, particularly to enterprise. But here was like a resurgence of time where you could have like, consumer apps. I just remember I was working at AOL, and in 2006, there was a YouTube video of the founders. And I remember they were wearing these Burger King hats, and they said, "We just sold our company for $1 billion to Google." And I was like, what? I go, okay, so now it's time. I was like, okay, now I think maybe. So I actually called up my cousin. He's worked in venture capital for quite some time. And I grew up with him. Amazing. Just amazing at business. And I was just so fortunate. We got on really well. And one of the things I learned is like, wow, he's so gifted in leadership as well. I didn't know that at the time. Called him up, went through several ideas, and he's all, "These are all great ideas, Holly, but we need somebody to build it." And it's kind of funny because, there's kind of my in-betweener jobs at the consulting company. That's where I met our third co-founder, who I was like, oh, I know just the guy, because I'd worked with him. And I'm a huge fan. If anybody's thinking about doing a startup and you're working, I feel like sourcing from coworkers, obviously off of the company's time and resources, it's just a phenomenal way to find co-founders. That's me. As you figure out how to work together. But this particular person, I remember he was leaving early while we were working together. And I'm like, some days you're really dressed up. Like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, back then you had to go up and down physically this very famous road called Sand Hill Road with all the the venture capitalist and you knock on the door and you're like, hey, I'd like to have a meeting to pitch my company to see if you'd like to give us money. So he was doing that, quote unquote, on the side while he was trying to make money. And actually what was kind of nice is while I was working at AOL, he had left, but we kept in touch. And how we kept in touch was we would do his project together on the side, like trying to like build it. I was like, yeah, I'll do the interface. I'll design the interface. He's like, this is great because we need people to figure out how to use this. I'm not there all the time. Like for consumer products, the interaction is very important because not everybody's there to follow them through and do a systems implementation. Like you have to, the interface has to speak for itself. So it becomes very important. And he knew that and he valued that. But I was like, oh, I know just the guy. All his side projects is kind of like he would be great building. And he goes, well, Holly, I could only do back end. I need a front end person. I was like, oh, when I was at AOL, there's somebody I do lots of projects with, and he's great at front end. I go, I know just the guy. So the four of us got together. We started a company. We started with a completely different idea than mobile gaming. We started doing corporate social networks.
How interesting.
Yeah, I know. At the time, we thought we were really brilliant. We're like, oh, Facebook was very popular, and they were very smart because they basically lassoed the community based off their email domain.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, that's very smart, but they're lassoing it around college students, which are time rich but poor. They have no money. So we're like, what if we do this around like young working professionals?
Yeah.
And we learned a lot. LinkedIn was already there, but it was almost like the internet in many ways. Yeah. We pretty much did, within 8 months, we did 3 product iterations. And during that time, we had about probably like 20 cease and desist letters and 5 daily actives, which were probably our mothers. So
wow.
And we kind of ran out of our seed funding. So we got some seed funding because our CEO, which was my cousin, was the CEO, was the one doing the fundraising.
Yeah.
And it was pretty funny because I think the investor, it was coming towards it. I think she probably took pity on us, one, and second, when she gave us the money. But then when we were running out, she's like, don't worry, it's not even worth the what's it called? The write-off, the tax write-off. So we're at the end of our rope and we were like, what should we do? And during this time, I think in terms of my faith, there was just a lot that I was managing. It was, for any founder out there, I think sometimes the best description is the highs are really high and the lows are really low.
Really
so
low.
Yeah. Like I've worked inside of big companies before. And the thing is it's like being inside of a yacht. But that world, that microcosm, you have very little control and very little impact. Like, because you're together, you're trying to build this big thing. But then when you're building your own business, you probably feel this. It's like you're in a rowboat together and you feel every single bip and bob. And it's very strenuous and you don't know, you see this 10-foot wave. You don't know if you're going to overcome it. So there was certainly a lot of like, I look back at my journal at the time and just a lot of just crying out to God. So many types of fronts. On top of that, I had, when I started the company, I was newly married. So it's like 3 weeks after I got married, I'm like, hey, I want to go do this thing. So my husband really
supported
it, sacrificed a lot. I was also the oldest, so I'm sitting into childbearing years at that time too.
Yeah.
So trying to have a child, trying to do this startup, there was just a lot going on, I'd say.
Absolutely.
I think I've been spending a lot of time just reflecting. I was like, wow, it's taken a lot of years to just kind of recover. Just look back and I'm like, wow, this is like a pretty
the reason. Yeah, exactly. That's the reason I'm feeling very, very tired.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think about how, I don't know, when we had kids, or I mean, still have them, but when they were younger, just feeling like, wow, life in general, I think is just very binary. It's just so hard. I mean, it's just, as women, that's kind of the natural kind of flow and influx of like what happens is things start picking up at your career. Those are still like the childbearing years. So kind of like not necessarily, but that balance. And I think for us, there is that question of, can we have it all? And in many ways it is like zero or one, zero or one. I don't think. And during those busy seasons, I think you see how God provides, from even some of the tiniest things to even some of the larger things. But there was definitely, I feel like the startup was another child. And this one was a little bit harder because it's not something I did with my husband. It was something I did with this other group of people. And there was just so much, and me being young, quite frankly, there was a lot of identity wrapped in there as well, of like, who am I? This is who I am. If I can't become
feeling
successful,
like it needs to succeed because
it
it's
needs
kind
to
of verdict
succeed,
on me.
because it's like, oh, this is my value, this is my worth.
How
I'm
did
sure it
you?
would have been replaced with other things like my job, right? That's and Silicon Valley is very infamous for that.
And also high achieving people just do manage that question all the way through, I think, with different iterations. But how did you sort of move into gaming then?
So it's kind of funny. There was one stop along the way. Just as like, it's always funny. There's this in the U.S. There's this famous Garth Brooks song called "Unanswered Prayers," and he sings a lot about how every night in high school he would pray that this girl would be his wife, and then he comes back to, I know this is very American, comes back to what they call a homecoming football game where all the alumni come back. And he sees her and he's there with his wife and he's like, oh my gosh, I thank God for unanswered prayers. And there's a lot of like knowing that God is in control, but also the prayers. I'm not saying don't pray for things, because I think in that conversation with God, you learn about trust, you learn about deepening. There's a lot of things I feel like that is good. That's my personal theology, but I also feel like God is sovereign, or well, that's what it says in the Bible. So, and he wants good things for us. I think that time and time again is always a lesson that comes up for me. I think sometimes my culture can be a bit, how we show love is very practical. So I think, I would struggle with a lot of like, I do this for you, you do this, like a bit more transactional, versus this entire, like, that's just the state of God. He only knows how to give good gifts. Like, he's not a withholding God. He's not like, I'm going to exchange this for that. And I think in terms of like, when we came at a very deep valley, and at the time it was kind of funny, our product manager was like, he was doing a blog on the side, and we had recruited him to actually help us get onto Facebook, or not get onto Facebook, help us build Facebook for professionals. That didn't quite work. Our thesis was a bit wrong, and he still like knew a lot. And he's like, they're basically opening it up for anybody to build a feature on there. And so we ended up building communities for TV shows and sports teams. And before that, which was really funny, because we were talking to the investor, and we're like, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. She's like, one, go for it. It's not worth the tax write-off. So it's better than shutting down. And she's like, two, and this is kind of really my, she's like, go where the users are. And in my head, it reminds me of that old like saying where it's like, if you can't bring users to church, you should bring church to users. And that's really, that really kind of spoke to me also in business, and even, just going back to like how incarnational ministry has spoken to me personally. It's just, oh, okay, yeah, we should go there. We shouldn't like force them to come here, because I was trying to get people to use my website, but I'll just go to Facebook and we'll build applications. So that thing actually blew up. It blew up to over 30, maybe 60, I have to get it right. Millions, tens of millions of registered users. It was so long ago. We were the largest community for TV shows and sports teams. So if you like loved a particular like sports team, like say if you were a Man U fan, you had this whole community that you could talk to. You could even put up pictures or these quotes of these sports fans, and same with TV shows. And they just didn't have that at the time. And it's so funny because in the US, when these large television networks like ABC, NBC, they wanted to distribute their video programming on Facebook. They actually didn't call Facebook up; they called us up, because at the
Wow.
time Facebook didn't have any type of video kind of technology that was able to play it. And so basically what ended up happening was we started, that grew really big. And you're like, well, what happened to that? That doesn't sound like gaming. It's not. We had this thing called a 2008 crisis. And overnight,
Yes.
we lost users, we lost advertising dollars. And the funniest thing is we started our fundraise in May of 2008. And then we had closed an investor. And all they had to do was wire the money in, I'm going to say this is October, November. I have to look it up. It was in fall. The day they were supposed to wire the money was the same day Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns dropped to a dollar the US, and it
Yeah.
kicked off, like it
The
just spread
whole
the financial crisis.
Yeah.
And like for a week, it was crickets from them. We're always like, oh, there's one business lesson we learned is nothing is final till money is in the
till
bank.
it's in the bank.
And yeah, for my CEO, it really kicked off. And it's funny because if you talk to other founders during that time fundraising, you can see just the whites of our eyes. It's just like, it was
I'm sure.
one of the worst times to fundraise. It took us about, and then we were running out of money at this point. Like we were pretty good, but because the advertising dollar, we pretty much lost $3 million contracts overnight.
Wow.
We had to lay off a bunch of people. It was just really quite stressful. And they never, they were like, we're too scared to give you the money. So we're like, oh my gosh. So it was pretty bad. And then, so we had to change our business model. And so we changed into gaming. We were like, there was a company at the time called Zynga that was doing this amazing job. And it was like, oh, they're not impacted by advertising dollars. So we needed to shifted our model. Definitely a part of it. I wouldn't call myself a gamer, but my CEO was a gamer. Other people were gamers, or like on the team, they're like, let's do this. There really wasn't this type of gameplay on Facebook at the time. I was very excited as a designer because now I could design for the end user. And I'm like, if I provide you a good enough, a valuable experience, you will give us money in return. So it's got to be that valuable. And so basically our whole slate of games tended to be what we call mid-core. The first game that we came out with was called Kingdoms of Camelot. It was an IP that wasn't owned. It was well known in the Western Hemisphere. And we did what we call strategy-based game. I liken it to Settlers of Catan, where you build your resources, and from your resources, you can build your buildings and your kingdom. Yeah. And then you can go create treaties or war, one of the two. And it would be these like long, like session plays. And yeah. So, and for Facebook, it was really new because before you could only chat with your friends. And the things that we learned, I call them passion-based graphs, or because Facebook's based off of who you know. But this one is, we were building communities. So we connected people based off of like their passions and their interests, right? So we kind of helped spark a lot of new relationships. And that was something we had learned how to do through the communities, as well as when it came to games, is now just because I liked a game and we're friends doesn't mean we're going to like the same game. So a lot of people became friends in our community. Like, how do you bring people together that don't know each other, but based off of these interests? Has been something that I think we've learned a lot about. And it was a theme. And so so that's how we got into gaming. And we ended up moving with a lot of platforms. In 2012 we ended up in mobile gaming, mainly because just the growth of mobile was just such a hard opportunity to ignore. So we ended up going there around that time. And we pretty much brought over what they call free to play or in-app purchases. We were one of the first, it wasn't the first, but we were one of the first top grossing games that was an in-app purchase. And ever since then, people actually, you don't launch a game without that business model. And even the console games have changed that way.
Was that Marvel Contest of Champions, Holly? Was that one?
So that was a couple years later. So our first game was Kingdoms of Camelot, Battle for the North. So we basically took that and put it into, because we had to learn a lot about this new platform and how to grow on this new platform, how to build on this new platform. There's just a lot of things you're learning.
Well,
And
because
then,
when
yeah.
I met you, I couldn't believe that you were behind that game, because my older two, my twins, were insanely into that. And I think
Thank
over
you.
COVID, during lockdown here, it sort of really kicked off again as well. And they were obviously
Yeah.
connecting with their friends and stuff through this game. But I remember
Oh, yeah.
my husband and I, will you get off that game? You know?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go
No.
that way. But we've also seen a lot of like
It's
just the
extraordinary.
power, just the power of games, of
But it
just
was
how
community.
much.
It's true for
Yeah.
particularly for boys. I think for young
Oh,
men, it's
absolutely.
so powerful. So it's really amazing to hear that
Yes.
Christian vision behind what you were setting out to build.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was definitely meant to bring people together, and we've had countless stories of people, fathers and sons playing it
Yes.
together,
Yeah.
or that's definitely for Marvel. But our other games, some marriages have happened in a result, or lifelong
Oh,
friends, or even
amazing.
like shut-ins that just didn't have the access to. And I guess everybody during COVID felt like what a shut-in felt like, and
Mm.
what does that human connection kind of look like when you can't have the human connection?
Mm.
So games to me, I mean, it's kind of funny. Since this is a Christian podcast,
Yeah.
for me, I feel like traditionally games have been overran by a lot of men. There's actually not a lot
Yes.
of women there, and oftentimes during our interviews, whenever we'd have women apply. And actually, I think this question is quite sexist, and finally, I got it off of the recruiting for at least interns at my company. But they would ask the question, "Are you a gamer?" And most women would answer, "No, I'm not a gamer." Even I've said it earlier. I'm like, I'm not really a gamer,
No.
because the way the industry has described the game, what gamer is very heavily male. And then they would always follow up with, but I play X, Y, and Z game. I play Candy Crush, and I'm like
Yeah.
level 1,000, and I haven't spent any money. And I'm like, you are a gamer. You just like don't quite realize it. I also feel like gaming has changed a lot. As a result, there's now it's 50% women who play games, and when I was doing this, it was a much lower.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of funny because when I would tell people I was in video games, the biggest thing they would say to me is like, "Oh," especially women, they'd be like, "I'm so sorry, I don't play games." And I would always tell them like, "Don't worry, it's not you. It's because there
Yeah.
hasn't been a game made for you."
Yeah.
And for
And there
me,
was
I'm
a
always feeling
perception,
like,
wasn't there, of sort of, it being very violent or very overly
there
sexualized. Because obviously there were
oh,
some games that were like
absolutely.
that, right?
I
But
mean,
yeah.
there's a lot of most of the games are built by men. So I'm just kind of like, and then it's like, if it's mostly men and not a lot of them are Christian, they may not
Mm,
care as much, right?
mm,
So it's not all of them that are that way, but I think probably as a mom of boys, you care a lot about, is there too much
mm.
violence? Is there too much sexual? Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is, it is content, and you have to be aware of it, just like you're watching movies for
Yeah.
sure,
Absolutely.
or reading a book. It is content, and so yeah, that's a call for like more Christian creators to go and build games, build
Enter
movies,
the
build all
field.
these things,
Yeah.
and to the field, because I just think it's totally ripe. There's so much influence that can happen. We probably need a whole nother hour for like why Christians are not in this space.
Yeah.
But
Well, maybe we
my
can do
final,
that, Holly.
yeah, I mean, yeah, but like, yeah, the call is like, in my mind, I feel like at the heart of the game is play, and that's
It's
just
where
the
people
imago.
are. I mean, that's
It's
the
where people are.
standout.
It's play,
Yeah.
and to me, like play is part of God's character. It's our
Mhm.
imago Dei, and I'm always like, well, the first game you played, any human played, it was not a gendered game. It was called Peekaboo, and you were
Yeah.
learning object permanence. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm like, no, there should be like gaming should be for everyone. And it's kind of funny.
Mm.
I feel a little vindicated about the gamer term being very sexist because this one woman, she worked at Microsoft. She's like, actually, we changed all of our marketing campaign to be players versus gamers. And so
That's
it's
so
kind of interesting.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So I feel a little vindicated. So yeah, I think that there's certainly there's so much in games itself that screams our imago Dei. That's probably why
Yeah.
we're drawn to it. Everybody's like, why are we addicted to the war? And I think it's because it's a little bit of who we are, how God
Yeah.
created us to connect, to yeah, even in book, like I always feel like there's a little bit of God there, and that's probably why we get drawn to these types of things.
And that's
Yeah.
why people are there. So in from what you shared, I've heard that out of adversity, often creativity and fresh leading has come. And it hasn't all been absolutely easy plain sailing. There have been twists and winds, but God's been there through it all. I've heard about your sort of commitment to and desire for and passion for community, deep relationships, and that theme of the incarnational. Can I ask you about for Christians sort of watching this or listening to this who aren't, steeped in the tech world and are hearing a lot about AI and how the world is changing and, some of the kind of ethical concerns around AI. How can Christians sort of think healthily about tech right now?
Yeah.
What do we need to be on our guard against? And, where do we need sort of resilience and resistance? But where do we need to also be like jumping in actually and, getting in the flow of what God's doing?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert by any means. Quite. So I'm just gonna throw
As
out
someone who
there.
works in as someone who's in that field and world, yeah.
So I've certainly heard the opinion of it's just a tool on one side, and then I've also seen and felt like, oh, this might be a bit more than just a tool. And I have concerns about this on the right side because I think it's more than just a tool. And don't get me wrong, I think right now for like a year or two, it is just a tool. But I think it's quickly going to change and become more than a tool. And so I'm very cautious about just be like, oh, it's just a tool. You have to learn how to master it. And don't get me wrong, I actually think don't be scared of it. You should go in and learn it because it's coming. Like that's the one thing that's like very much about this technology is it's coming. The genie is out of the bottle. So now the next question is how can we as Christians like influence it? How can we as Christians I haven't been the biggest fan of a holy huddle. So how can we kind of get involved more in it to kind of influence it and even think about ways don't get me wrong. I think like there's so many ways where, AI can actually help bring the gospel to the masses. But I also, one of my largest concerns is that it becomes the tool becomes the master.
Yeah.
In many ways, I'm like, oh, I could totally see people already, Harvard just did a study and it's probably very US skewed, but they were asking like, what are the use cases of Gen AI between 2024 and 2025? I'll email it to you later. But basically the chart was really fascinating. The first choice last year was creative like stuff, like I think generation, yeah. And then now this year, the first use case is therapy and companionship.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's replacing therapy and it's replacing human. And then the next two use cases, which is very fascinating, are new use cases. So the next two use cases is, oh my gosh, I'm going to blank on the second one. The third one is finding purpose, which is fascinating. I know I'm going to have to just look it up very quick.
All our listeners will be so greatly reassured to know that the brilliant person behind this incredible tech company still sometimes needs to look things up. We're all the same, I promise.
Well, that's the thing is I feel like my brain is getting
Everyone will
older and
be
older. Oh,
absolutely here for it.
second use case is organizing my life. Yeah, see,
Yeah.
I should probably use AI to have given me that. But it's organizing my life. But that's also the other thing, like in general, I think like the tech is reflecting of like the creators in many
Yeah.
ways. Like we are ultimately made in the image of God. And then we create things, and you see that in a mini like microcosm is it kind of reflects, and because people joke around, we're like, should we say please and thank you? People are always like, sometimes I write please just in case they ever get mad at me,
Yeah.
and they talk to me back, they're going to be nice to me. And I'm like, well, I think it's the reflection, is training off of everything that we've been given it, right? Or
Yeah.
we've given to them.
It's just
So
scrapes all that information,
yeah.
doesn't it? Yeah.
I think like the other, like some of the sobering concern I have is like, it's in some ways it's a bit of a farce in that it's teaching you how to be human, but it cannot take the place of certain human
No.
things. Like
No.
it can't exercise for me, it can't sleep for me, it can't eat for me. So it is really
Sadly,
meant
it
for you
can't
to
clean my
be.
house for me either.
Well, I think that's coming. That I
Oh,
think is
I hope
coming.
so. That
Oh,
would be
I
great,
totally think
wouldn't
so. Oh, I think so. Like it'll become like embodied AI.
it? Mm.
Absolutely, robots, right? I think that will be here. We already have self-driving cars, so if you ever come to San
Yeah.
Francisco, you should
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But things that are human, like I cannot. And then it brings me to think like about like, well, what about your soul? Like, you know, and what are those things that are spiritual
Mm.
that this can probably help, but I don't know. And that's like one of my larger concerns is like, oh, well, people just say like these bots are praying for me, so God hears these prayers, like just kind of outsource like it praying for me.
It's interesting how this surge of AI is coming at the same time as a huge resurgence of an interest in God, and Gen Z in particular showing up with a spiritual thirst, wanting human contact and embodied religious experience together. You know, it's definitely seeking truth and historical kind of foundation as well, not just woo woo and crystals, like actually the Christian faith with
Yeah.
historic creeds and, an impact on Western culture and
Oh,
all of that.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think this generation, so first they've been hit with COVID.
Yeah.
So just that lack of like human interaction, I think I've certainly seen all over, reports from the field. Some people, I'm like in Silicon Valley, like people are
Yeah.
talking about their faith, and you're like, what? Peter Thiel, this like big investor, like he's a Christian.
Yeah.
That's the first thing people say. I was like,
Yeah.
and people are
Extraordinary.
like, and then they're even like non-Christians who are coming. It's like, well, Peter Thiel's so respected in the non-Christian field. They're like, well, if he's believing this stuff, maybe
Maybe I
it's not
should
as
look into it.
nutty. It's
Yeah.
not as nutty as it really sounds. And there is like this push for you're right, this embodied experience, and this push for like um spirituality
Mm.
in nature, in all of these things. It is this weird juxtaposition though, because then you have this huge push of AI.
Yeah. But maybe the two, it's contiguous, like one is driving us to the other.
Yeah,
Holly, our
it
time
could
has
be.
gone so quickly.
Oh gosh.
I've loved it.
Yeah.
Can I ask you one last question, which we ask everybody who comes on the podcast? And it's essentially the question, if you could say one thing to your younger self, let's think about 24-year-old Holly. I don't know how old you were when you were coming out of the program that in San Francisco.
Oh
24,
yeah.
maybe 25, something like that. What would the one thing that you wish your 25-year-old self could have heard and sort of deeply known?
I think that God thinks that you are enough because of him. Like
Mm.
like that, I think just that's been just a common thread of like, I'm look different,
Mm.
I'm created different, like there's something wrong with me.
Mm.
And yes, there's sin, and I've decided to choose away from God, but to be like inherently, you know, my culture
Loved.
was wrong in all of this, like, so then I have to validate.
Mm.
So Yeah.
That's amazing. What a powerful note to end on, that if we could receive that truth and walk into our callings, whether that's into tech or any of the other careers that people listening to this are thinking about. Holly, thank you so much for joining us today. Honestly, you've been amazing, and I would love to get you back on if you're open to it. Have another go at why are Christians not so much going into the tech industry, and on all of the other things we haven't touched on yet. But we need to draw stumps here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Honestly, you're amazing. And people can look you up. I looked you up on Wikipedia, and it was extraordinary to see you on there and all the things that you've achieved with your life.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this podcast this week as well. If you're enjoying it, we'd love you to tune in again. Maybe you could give us a follow, share this episode with friends. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to next time on the Lead podcast for Advocate Collective.